Thank you very much, ladies, for that nice introduction. You actually saved me a lot of time introducing our amazing panelists here. I also have to thank AGDA and the ECSSR for hosting this really amazing forum. I've been here last year. I've had the pleasure of joining. And this year, I'm very excited to be joining you all at the Hili Forum. As they said, our panel is discussing major issues, namely economic disruptions globally. And I'm happy to have representatives from two superpowers, India, China, and Africa, and Europe. And this is going to be, a very diverse and very interesting session. So what we are witnessing today, tariffs, escalating trade tensions, cross-country attacks that happen on a whim, multiple wars, a Red Sea shipping crisis, and global supply chain problem that caused global businesses to lose approximately $184 billion annually due to supply chain disruptions. These are just some of the super abnormal disruptions that we are witnessing today, which defy conventional predictions and challenge established economic norms. The result? Polarization and a general sense of uncertainty around the world. As power diffuses beyond established Western economies, new actors and models reshape the rules of engagement, calling for fresh frameworks to navigate this complex terrain. And I'm delighted to explore how governments, businesses, and institutions are adapting to an era where economic disruption is not only just frequent, but it is fundamentally transformative. Among these disruptions, of course, as I mentioned, are tariffs, or what I call Trump tariffs. And Ambassador Mohan, I wanted to start with you. So speaking of tariffs, President Donald Trump just imposed 50% tariffs on most US imports from India. So he's basically punishing one of the world's largest economies over its purchase of discounted Russian oil. That was the announced reason. That's an example of a huge financial and trade risk. How big is that risk, and how should India respond, in your opinion?
So thank you very much, and I want to thank not just AGDA, but also the ECSSR for this opportunity, and thank you for moderating this panel. Look, the first headline news, and that is really the bad news, is that if the Trumpian tariffs were not in place, the world economy would have grown by 3%. I'm talking global trade in goods. Yeah. With the Trumpian tariffs, the expectation is it'll grow only by 0.7%, and some people say it could dip down to 0.4%. So the impact of the Trumpian tariffs is very clear. As to your specific question on India, no question, it's meant to hurt us, and it will hurt us, but India is a big enough economy. So the first thing I want to say is that conversation between India and the United States has not stopped. So we are still talking to the US. This general strategy of India has been twofold. With regard to the relationship with the United States, it's an important strategic partnership. So no confrontation, but no capitulation, and yes to conversation. So we are talking. I think what other things that we will do eventually is what a lot of countries will do. We will look to alternative markets where we can. Yeah. We would like to develop the domestic market. We have, after all, a very, very big country, a big domestic market. And then we will also try and expedite the free trade agreements that were already in the pipeline. I think we have concluded one with the UK, and we will now go ahead, full steam ahead with the one with the European Union. And the European Union team is expected in Delhi next week, that is in the next couple of days. And we would like to try and expedite those conversations with them. So what countries are going to do, Lena, is essentially what I have chosen to call multiple strategic hedging. Everybody is going to hedge because trade is just way too important just to be left to one market or the other. So all countries will try to hedge, and that's what India will do.
It seems like it's a natural reaction to look elsewhere. but it seems to have agitated the US at the same time. We've seen Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a picture with President Xi Jinping and with the Russian president, and we've seen the tweet that came after that. It was basically seen as a threat. Do you think that that was, a logical action and reaction?
It's easy to make that connection directly, but for those who have followed India, have understood India, we've never really deviated from what we call multi-alignment and strategic autonomy. India is not an ally of any country. I need to say that loud and clear because this is a time when everybody is allying with everybody else.
Yeah.
But India is not, we don't have a treaty alliance with anybody. We follow an independent foreign policy. We are very proud as a country and as a civilization. So I don't think that is going to change.
Yeah.
But it's a fact that we would like to look east, and we have now started acting east. BRICS is an important forum. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is an important forum. It's interesting. The US market might be the biggest export market for India, but our trade with China, Ambassador sitting next to my left, it's a big relationship with China as well. So I think we are going to play all sides, play all cards, and play the long game. I can't put it better.
It seems like a fair and natural reaction. Speaking of China, Secretary General, obviously China has had its share of the Trump administration's tariffs and wrath, for lack of a better word. But deals were struck to some extent, deals that lowered tariffs from about 145%, I think it was, to now about 25% on China from the US. What lessons can be learned from China addressing this financial and trade risk when it was announced?
Thank you so much, Lina, for your moderation, and I'm very glad to join this group discussion on this very important and outstanding issue faced by the whole world. Indeed, the world is faced with a huge threat and challenge, mainly because of the tariff war. And the tariff war is not only undermining the global economy, but also shaken and jeopardize the global governance, the global economic order. And I'm sure that for all of us, not only for the panel, all of us are thinking while the world is at a crossroads and how to address this issue and how to answer all these relevant questions, including the ones you have asked. Well, I'm currently a Secretary General, as you may heard from the introduction, a Secretary General for the Boao Forum for Asia, which is aimed at promoting regional economic cooperation. I'm no longer in the Chinese diplomatic service, so I doubt whether I'm the right one to speak on behalf of China. But I do have followed very closely what's happening in the past several months. I think what strikes me, answering your question, what strikes me the most from the Chinese approach in addressing this very complicated situation is that first China adopted a very tough response to the tariff war, and also it has taken a number of countermeasures against the U.S. imposed tariffs. I think that's, I'm interested in that because it's not because of a rivalry between the big powers, economic powers. It's really because that while when such a big thing is happening in the world, the whole international community should stay strong, should stay united.
But I think China has that luxury, right? It's a big country. It's considered a superpower. There's, a lot of what China can give. So it had that luxury to respond without flinching, I would say.
I think the importance of what China is doing is not only because it's defending its own national interest, but also defending the principles, defending multilateralism, free trade, the global trading system. I think that's important for the world. And another thing that strikes me is that the Chinese economy demonstrates strong resilience, resilience from strong growth, 5.3% in the first half of this year. Resilience from the social stability, from strong innovation dynamics, and from many things. I think that's also good news. That shows that when you are able to put your future in your own hands, don't be afraid of any war, whether it's a tariff war or a trade war. I think that's also a strong message for the whole world. And thirdly, to be briefly, I think what's also important is that even though some big power is is reversing from free trade, from multilateralism, China keeps opening its door, keeps opening up and reforming its economic system. I think that creates new opportunities for the whole world. I think that's also something we should keep in mind, even though something is happening, but that's not the end of the world. Life goes on, and if we can really stay strong, if we continue to open, if we continue to pursue multilateralism, we still have a bright future.
And I think we can see like a lot of movement towards China, and it will be interesting to see how that transpires. Dr. Kayode, moving on to Africa. Nigeria's foreign minister recently said that West African nations want to strike deals with the US over energy and rare earth minerals. But the Trump administration's looming expansion of travel ban is risking derailing those efforts. However, on the other hand, Trump said that China will supply the US with magnets and rare earth minerals critical to the auto and battery industries in exchange for Chinese students' continued access to US universities. So there was sort of a deal that was struck there. Was this, in your opinion, a good deal? And should West African countries have made a similar deal with the US to ensure that this exchange happens, this very important exchange?
Thank you, Lina, and let me also thank AGDA and the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research for the invitation. I'd like to go on a bit of a historical journey. The last major global shift that is similar to what we're experiencing now was 1945, 80 years ago. Most of Africa was not at the table. Only two African countries were independent, Liberia and Ethiopia. So we were largely recipient of that order rather than a rule maker. What is happening now, and I guess what the Nigerian Foreign Minister was talking about, was really similar to what Ambassador spoke to about the autonomy to negotiate on the basis of national interest. But good as that may be in the case of Nigeria, I'm not so sure that is the best for Africa right now. I think Africa needs to begin to look at this as an opportunity for autonomy collectively rather than individually. So that negotiation has to go beyond Nigeria, United States, Nigeria, China, Nigeria, India, to what is the need for us as a continent? How do we ensure that our strategic agreement, for example, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which seeks to integrate the economy of Africa, is brought to bear on whatever negotiations we're having? So it would require the continental body, the African Union, to play a much more active role. And that's not to say sovereignty would not count. It's just to suggest that whether it is in FOCAC discussions or in our discussions with India, we also need to factor in how the continent responds to this, rather than just regard Africa as recipients individually of whatever goals, whatever is defined by the United States. We really should not be in that. We're already caught in that, if you like, Gramscian trap of the old dying and the new not yet born. And the uncertainty in this transition period is one that we have to really carefully redefine according to the interest of Africa collectively.
Allow me to mention there was a visit to the White House from several African leaders. I'm sure you followed.
Oh yes, 5 of them.
Yes, 5 of them. Some went very well, some didn't go as well as much. Very interested to know what were your thoughts on that visit.
Well, again, that's part of the Trumpian tantrums.
Yeah.
If you want to,
I like that.
to use Ambassador's point earlier, I think even the United States need to really ask itself what its interest is.
Yeah. And what Africa has to offer.
And what Africa has to offer. Because when you look at it, our demographic assets are some of the things that will be very critical in this transition phase. I mean, Africa used to be 1/8 of the world in 1950. Today, 1 in every 4 persons in the world by 2050 will come from Africa. The median age in Africa is 18. In China, it's 38. In India, it's 28. In the United States, it's 38. So if we harness that human capital appropriately, the world has a lot to benefit from that. If you go away from the demographic assets I'm talking about and even go in the direction of natural resources, Africa has a very critical role to play there.
Of course.
Platinum, 90% of the world platinum is in Africa. 75% of the world cobalt is in Africa. Half of the gold assets in the world is in Africa. So you then ask yourself, if we have all this and we're doing individual negotiations, how would Africa maximize its benefit? Unless some of those countries with those resources come together collectively to negotiate.
Exactly.
Just the way we did in the age of OPEC, because strategic minerals is the new oil in the world now. And that's what informed the formation of OPEC in reaction to the way United States and other countries were pushing for oil at the time. I think it's time to have this organized response again on the continent.
Thank you for that answer. It's very important. Dr. Christian, moving on to you. We're speaking about abnormal geopolitical tensions as well in this day and age, and they haven't been seen for centuries. Some even say since World War II. One of those is obviously the Ukraine-Russia war. And obviously that has affected Europe in many, many ways. Do you feel that this war has negatively affected the global economic power of Europe that has been long-standing for a long time?
Yes, undoubtedly. First of all, I would like to thank you, Lina, and the organizers, AGDA and ECSSR, for the invitation. The way I see it from a global context and the difference between how we are today and how it was in the past, an answer to your question, is quite remarkably different. And I say this because if we had to compare how shocks and what kind of shocks we faced in the past, we noticed that in the past the shocks were cyclical, in the meaning that they were predictable and they were also containable. Today, we see that the patterns of history have changed and have changed dramatically. Economies before moved in cycles. There was growth, there was slowdown, there was sometimes financial crisis, as well as the disruptions were cycles. There were wars, force majeures. They were intense but temporary. And as we can see today, and this is my opinion, maybe there are people who don't agree with this, they are permanent in nature, and I see that they are structural and systematic. So Europe, the economic power of Europe, absolutely had serious economic headwinds. Weakened competitiveness, for sure, increased dependency, Europe lost a lot of ground in terms of global economic power. On the other hand, I think what is important today is to see and to look beyond the immediate negatives. And not to see only the permanent decline, but the fundamental redefinition of policies and future policies which will shape this continent and make it more competitive. Ironically, war forced Europe to accelerate certain transitions which were long overdue in many sectors, in the health sector, in the industrial policy sector. However, the real challenge today, and it is very interesting to have colleagues from continents who are very good at this, is velocity, is speed. No doubt that Europe, till now, has remained reactive, has remained fragmented, is very bureaucratic and very heavy.
I think it was a shock to see that this war really showed the world and Europe within itself, Europeans,
Yes,
how
of course.
unready it was for something like this.
Lina, it's a wake
shocking.
up. It was a wake up call. You know, it was a wake up call, and now ultimately, it is the choice of those leading the European institutions. Unfortunately, and I'm very critical about this, till now we are not seeing that that type of sentiment in European institutions. They are still pedantic, they are still heavy, and they don't match the speed and the velocity
Of these developments.
of competitors like India, like China, who are moving very fast in all sectors, with the right policies, with the right choices, and with the results.
Yeah.
Because you can also compare and make an analysis of the economic results between these continents.
Yeah. And I think a big reason for that maybe is traditional policy making and how maybe it doesn't work anymore. And Ambassador Mohan, I wanted to talk to you about that. When it comes to these trade tensions that we're witnessing today, these economic disruptions that we haven't seen in such a long time, do traditional policy-making tactics work? And how can they evolve to deal with such disruptions? Do we even know what these are?
So it's very clear that traditional policy making is under pressure. For example, the organization that anchors the multilateral trading system is the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization used to have three functions. One was a negotiating function, the second was a dispute settlement mechanism and a function, and the third was trade monitoring function. All three have just disappeared, frankly. There is no negotiation other than plurilateral negotiation. Dispute settlement mechanism is completely grounded, and a trade monitoring function is dependent on the goodwill of members. So there is no trade monitoring in that sense. So the blunt answer to your question is that no, the traditional policy, trade is moved from being MFN based, and I don't want to sound like a professor, which I am. I'm always fond of saying I'm an extinguished ambassador trying to be a distinguished scholar, but MFN, most favored nation, is out. Trade on the basis of non-reciprocity is out, and trade has been weaponized and geopoliticized like never before. So your traditional policy making is not going to work. Having said that, I think it's important to understand the problem in perspective. US constitutes 13% of global imports. So 87% of imports is fine. Let's look at it that way. At least, thank God. 30% of global trade is services, so that is excluded. Only 70% which deals with goods is included. If you look at it from that point of view, and there is regional integration at work, so what India will have to do, and I can only speak for India, is that apart from trying to settle a bilateral trade agreement with the United States, because in areas like seafood exports, gems, jewelry, textiles, garments, the US market is important for India, at least for the time being. So we cannot not negotiate. But then I think we have to start looking at regional mega trading arrangements, which India has not done so far. And the thing which springs to mind is the Comprehensive Pacific Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which is really the mega agreement that gathers free traders of the world. India has a mixed record on free trade. We have protected our domestic industry, to be fair, but at the same time, we now have reached a tipping point when India is buying into the concept of free trade. So given that, I think India will have to fundamentally reset its trade policy. Until a year ago, India did not accept that labor standards, environment standards, and government procurement are trade issues. Can you believe it? We said we will not negotiate environment as part of a trade agreement. We will not negotiate labor standards as part of a trade agreement. But we are now doing that with the European Union. We just did that with the UK. So there is a paradigm shift that is going on in the world. And to just summarize, I think trade is increasingly going to be non-MFN. It's going to be strictly reciprocal. It's going to be highly geopolitical and weaponized. And at the end of the day, trade is also going to be strategic. It doesn't matter what shoes you wear, what watches you wear, that I don't care. But are you not going to be concerned about where your medicines come from? Are you not going to be concerned where your semiconductors come from? Are you not going to be concerned where your chips come from?
Yeah.
Are you not going to be concerned where your photovoltaic cells come from for your solar panels? Those are strategic. And I don't see a going back on this, frankly, Lena. I think trade will, in at least those important products, will be strategic, it will be geopolitical, and it's frankly too important to be left only to trade experts. So political leaders will get involved. So I think in that sense, your traditional policy making, where policy making is just going to be done by the Ministry of Commerce, that's a thing of the past. Every leader will now want to get involved with international trade.
So it's really a paradigm shift because, again, we've never seen disruptions like these, I think, in a very long time. And we're not just talking about trade and tariffs. We're talking about, as I said, wars. We have climate change. We have Red Sea crisis, supply chain crisis, and so on. So Ambassador Zhang, I wanted to go back to you here. You have been the permanent representative of China to the United Nations. So you really have an insider view of how international organizations deal with such turmoil. The obvious question is, are you glad you're not in the halls of the United Nations today at this time of turmoil in the world? Yes or no?
Lena, as a trained diplomat, I think my right answer is that I love my motherland. I love my previous post in serving my own country. And secondly, you know, I'm currently the Secretary General for an organization promoting regional cooperation. I also love this job very much.
That's great. It's good to have people like you to, you know, be in those halls and fix those issues. Can you tell us how institutions like these can address emerging financial and trade risks from your experience?
I think it's since we are faced with a very complicated situation, and as you have mentioned earlier in your conversation with other panelists, the current situation might be very much unprecedented since the end of the Second World War. And we are really in a very complicated situation, but I do believe that the UN has a big say and has a big responsibility in addressing a crisis like this. You know, the UN with 193 members is the most representative international organization among all sovereign states, and also the UN is sitting at the center of today's international governance. Frankly, we cannot afford to see the UN failing to cope with today's situation. And judging from my experience, I also find ways that the UN can be really playing a very, very important role. First, the UN should really make even harder efforts and to mobilize solidarity and unity in defending multilateralism, in defending the Charter purposes and the principles, and also preventing the current situation from bad to worse.
Yep.
I think we are faced with a situation. It might slide into a more chaotic global situation, and that's not very far from us. So we have to be in high alert on that. And secondly, the UN is the best place to understand why these things are happening, and then to respond with a comprehensive reform of today's international system, including the financial and monetary and commercial system of today's world, especially because of the rise of the global south.
Yeah.
That's not something small. It's a big thing. As I see it, it's like a second wave of decolonization with economic independence as the main characteristics of this new wave of decolonization. So it's really the right time to move forward with substantive steps, making sure that the global south are substantively engaged in global decision-making. And thirdly, I think since we are faced with such a situation, you have mentioned the climate change, you have mentioned the sustainable development. I think the UN, whatever it happens, the UN should making every effort to make sure that the development process, the development programs will not be interrupted or disrupted by the trade war or by the other disruptions. Otherwise, we have to pay more efforts to go back to the right track. I'm glad to see that the UN is making a lot of efforts along that direction, and countries like China is also launching initiatives on global government, global development, on global security, on global governance, and along that direction. I'm optimistic about the role of the UN.
Thank you for those insights. Dr. Kayode, very quickly, we've spoken about economic turmoil, trade, wars, supply chain, and more. But for Africa, and correct me if I'm wrong, resource governance is really key to prosper even during these times for the African continent. What is stopping countries like Nigeria or the continent of Africa from reaching that economic prosperity despite these global challenges?
Very quickly, I made some reference to that earlier. I mean, some of these issues have to be addressed collectively. If you look at the wars that we're experiencing now on the continent, there are also resource wars. Whether you talk of Sudan or you talk of the Sahel, or many of the countries that are in conflict, they have external players also actively involved in those wars. And you could go back to an era where Africa collectively worked together to confront neocolonialism and apartheid, for example. And the nodal countries on the continent played a critical role there. I think it's time for those nodal countries, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, to be in the driver's seat again. Not just at the level of the United Nations, but also on the continent, in ensuring that the resources of Africa are actually governed by Africans.
Are you optimistic that that's going to happen anytime soon?
Well, it's inevitable because we are at an inflection point in the world where every region has to play what is in the best interest of her people.
Yes.
So I don't think we have a choice.
Mr. Christian, this question is very important, actually, and it really puts into lessons learned. So, under your tenure as the Minister of Economy in Malta, Malta achieved the fastest economic growth in the EU, attracting over 2 billion euros in investment and creating more than 5,000 jobs in 7 years. What were some of the global economic disruptions that were ongoing during your tenure, and how did you make these achievements in the country?
Yes, Lina, as you are saying, it is true that we achieved economic growth and we achieved also one of the highest rates of FDI per capita in terms of investment, but we cannot forget the global context. We were, in 2013, just coming out and dealing with the aftershocks of a global financial collapse. At the time, we were also having issues in the Eurozone with, I remind you, the bailout of Greece. Subsequently, there was Brexit, which for our country meant quite a huge disadvantage in terms of financial services. And there was the war in Libya, which is one of the major trade countries with Malta, both importation and exportation. I believe that let's say, the advantages which we had at the time and which we used in order to achieve growth primarily was the agility. When you have a small country, unlike the European Union, you have the legislative agility, flexibility to have legislation which is enacted and which can survive the competitiveness of the private industry. And that is something which, in a country like ours, a small country, you can do quite easily if you have the right legislation in force. Secondly, we diversified the economy. Malta achieved independence in 1964. It became an economic state in 1979. So at that time, it was completely dependent on the British military, the British naval forces. So we had to realign that for economic growth in order to attract tourism, attract industry. In 2013, we also diversified the economy into different sectors like the maritime sector, financial sector, the gaming industry, niche industries, manufacturing. So this diversification helped a lot.
Understood. We're almost running out of time, but I want to give you a chance to just say a final sentence. We're not going to take much of everyone's time. For your forward-looking thoughts on what's happening in the world and how we can deal with it. One sentence. Go.
So for the first time, inequalities both within countries and between countries is widening. Trade has to fix that. Thank you.
Mr. Zhang?
Well, stay on the right track with openness, with multilateralism, and with abiding by the principles and rules, and also stay with optimistics. The world is not ending. And then much more regional, much stronger regional cooperation. On that, please come to the Boao Forum for Asia. Much more sufficient time will be allocated to the debate in addressing the ongoing challenges of the world.
Dr. Kayode, thank you.
Well, Africa has to move from non-alignment to multi-alignment and choose friends on the basis of what is in the best interest of our continent.
Dr. Kirsten?
I think there are a lot of huge disruptions at the moment which can help us internationally to reposition ourselves in a much solid, safer, economic environment.
Thank you so much for the panel. It's very insightful. Give it up for our panelists, please. Thank you so much. Thank you.